then the endocrinologist and head Department of Endocrinology. We have a comprehensive diabetes care center and 360-degree comprehensive diabetes care center that's taking care of diabetes and endocrine disorders. Today, my topic for discussion is in-hospital hyperglycemia management. So this is my introduction. And the topics that will be covered in this presentation is we'll try to cover hyperglycemia in critically ill patients. These are those patients who are admitted in ICU and emergency wards. That means these are critically sick patients. These patients have to be treated with IV insulin therapy. I will also try to cover high blood sugar in those patients who are non-critically sick patients. That means those patients who are admitted in general wards, either with some medical issues or with surgical issues. And we'll try to compare basal bolus insulin regime, use of basal insulin and bolus insulin, why this basal bolus insulin regime is better than sliding scale insulin regime. And now the sliding scale is an obsolete insulin regime. We should try to avoid using sliding scale insulin regime. And why not use premixed insulin regime in day-to-day clinical practice in hospital setting? First, to start with the introduction, what is hyperglycemia in hospitalized patients? Once the blood sugar in hospital patients who are admitted for some medical or surgical reasons is more than 140 milligram per deciliter, then it is known as in-hospital hyperglycemia. And if we do not control their blood sugars properly, it will affect their outcome in the form of mortality. That means high blood sugar in those patients who are admitted in hospital. We are not controlling their blood sugars properly. It will increase mortality and patient complications. It will increase the length of stay in hospital, and it will increase hospital costs. High blood sugar is not seen in patients who have known diabetes. It can be for the first time seen in patients who have no history of diabetes in the past. That means these patients might be having undiagnosed diabetes in past. They might be having pre-existing diabetes, but never have gone for checking of blood sugar, or they never had any diabetes in past. Their A1C is within the normal range on admission, but they have new onset hyperglycemia or stress hyperglycemia. This was one of the studies which was done in one of the community hospitals in Europe. That means those patients who were admitted in hospital, 62% had normal blood sugar levels, 26% had pre-existing diabetes, and 12% had no history of diabetes in past. Their HbA1c was less than 5.7% on admission, but their blood sugars were high. That means these patients have new onset hyperglycemia because of the underlying disease. Their blood sugar is high. This is known as new onset hyperglycemia or stress hyperglycemia. What is the reason why once the patients are admitted in hospital and they have known diabetes, they might be having controlled blood sugars before admission, and their blood sugars go up once they are admitted in hospital. Or those patients have no history of diabetes, their A1C is less than 5.7, but once they are admitted in hospital, what are the reasons why their blood sugars are high once they are admitted in hospital? This is the reasons are that because of the underlying disease, might be some because of the surgical stress or the medical stress or the underlying disease, might be sepsis, might be myocardial infarction, might be stroke, might be trauma. There are release of some stress hormones, the catecholamines, the cortisol, which cause glycogenolysis, which cause gluconeogenesis, which cause insulin resistance at the level of glucose, at the level of skeletal muscle and adipose tissue, decreased glucose uptake by skeletal muscle and adipose tissue, and hyperglycemia, increase degradation of triglycerides at the level of adipose tissue, and that is known as lipolysis. So increase degradation of triglycerides, increase glycerol to the liver, formation of glucose from glycerol, that is known as gluconeogenesis, and more of fatty acids translocated to liver, generation of ketones, that is the pathophysiology of diabetic ketoacidosis in those patients. Once we do not use insulin, those patients have very high blood sugar once these patients are admitted in hospital, and that is one of the reasons why we should use insulin in those patients who are admitted in hospital. Already, I have explained that in hospital hyperglycemia is that once a patient is admitted in hospital and the blood sugars are more than 140 milligram per deciliter, so we should always monitor their blood sugars for next 24 to 48 hours. And if the blood sugars are within normal range, then we should stop monitoring their blood sugar. Also check for HbA1c. HbA1c is more than 6.5. That means even though the patient does not have any history of diabetes in past, that means these patients have undiagnosed diabetes. If HbA1c is less than 5.7 and blood sugars are more than 140 persistently on repeated monitoring, that means these patients have new onset hyperglycemia. Also, a patient is known case of diabetes and at the time of admission, HbA1c is very, very high. And that means patient has uncontrolled diabetes at the time of admission. And once we have treated patient and during hospitalization, patient has responded to the treatment, we're planning for discharge. And we should not continue with the same treatment that the patient was taking at the time of admission. That means the treatment that the patient was taking was not optimum treatment. So we might have to modify the treatment at the time of discharge, because at the time of admission, HbA1c was high and the treatment was not optimum for the patient. This is very important. So once the patients were admitted in the hospital, I've shown one of the studies which was done in community hospital in one of the European countries. So the total number of patients who are admitted in hospital will have some patients who have normoglycemia, those patients having pre-existing diabetes, and some of the patients having new onset hyperglycemia. These are those patients whose HbA1c is less than 5.7%, but their sugars are high on admission or during hospitalization. But the mortality is much, much higher in those patients who have new onset hyperglycemia in comparison to those patients who have pre-existing diabetes. That means those patients having stress hyperglycemia, even though these patients have short duration of hyperglycemia, their HbA1c is less than 5.7%. They do not have any history of diabetes in past, but the mortality is much, much higher. So we should treat these patients, their blood sugar should be treated the same way the way we are treating diabetes. We should not take that lightly, and as the mortality is much, much higher in this class of patients, because the underlying disease might be so severe, leading to release of these stress hormones causing new onset hyperglycemia. So otherwise their mortality will be much, much higher. We know that as the sugars are uncontrolled in those patients who are admitted in medical ICU, and the more the uncontrolled diabetes, if we see if the blood sugars are, the mean blood glucose are more than 300 in ICU, the mortality increases 4 times. The higher the blood sugar, the increase in mortality. Same is in non-ICU setting. If we see non-ICU setting and the blood sugars are less than 200 milligram per deciliter, less mortality, less number of complications, more blood sugars, more mortality and more complications. So from these 2 slides, we know that if the patients are admitted in either in medical or surgical ICU or in ward settings, that means non-critical settings, higher the blood sugar is, more the mortality is, more the morbidity is. What we want to treat their blood sugars, whether admitted in medical ICU or in ward settings, so as to decrease morbidity and mortality. But what should be the target for blood sugar control? We should have some evidence. So there were some trials to share some of those trials. So this was NICE sugar trial, the landmark trial for ICU patients. This was a study done in more than 6,000 patients. These patients were admitted in medical ICU, and they were divided into 2 arms. In one arm, the target for blood sugar was 81 to 108. The patients are given IV insulin infusion, and the target for blood sugar in one arm, I told you, was intensive glucose control arm, 81 to 108. In another arm, the conventional glucose control was the target, that means less than 180 milligram per deciliter. And insulin was given through IV infusion pumps, and nutrition was given enterally. And these patients were followed for next 90 days. And after 90 days, the mortality was seen in these 2 arms. It was seen the all-cause mortality was much, much higher in intensive glucose control arm. And as expected, there was the severe hypoglycemia was much more during hospitalization in intensive glucose control arm, as was expected. So it is not that once you go for intensive glucose control arm, you are going to decrease the mortality. From this trial, it came out that severe intensive glucose control might increase mortality, will increase mortality. So we should go for conventional glucose control, not for intensive glucose control arm, because this arm, this trial, this NICE sugar trial, the largest randomized control trial till date, and very important trial has shown that the intensive glucose control will increase mortality, will increase hypoglycemia in comparison to conventional glucose control. So the consensus what we have, recent consensus is same in 2021 AD and ESD consensus. For critically sick patients, the target for blood sugar is 140 to 180. So those patients who are admitted in medical ICU or emergency wards, we have to use IV insulin infusion. When the blood sugar is more than 180 milligram per deciliter, start IV insulin infusion. Titrate the dose of IV insulin infusion, target blood sugar 140 to 180 milligram per deciliter. Do not go below 110 and above 180 is not recommended. But if the patient is admitted in ward settings and patient is non-critically sick, and then the fasting blood sugar should be less than 120 milligram per deciliter, and pre-meal less than 140, and 2 hour post-meal 180 milligram per deciliter. We can use subcut insulins like basal bolus insulin to control fasting blood sugar levels, and bolus insulin to control post-meal. If the patient is taking nothing per orally, then we can use correctional dose insulin. We'll discuss in later slides. We should stop anti-diabetic drugs, and we should start insulin, IV insulin for hyperglycemic crisis, and subcut insulins for non-critical sick patients. Why to use insulin? Because it has rapid onset of action. We want rapid control of blood sugars. It has minimal side effects, minimal drug-to-drug interactions, because those patients who are hospitalized, they will be on multiple drugs because of comorbid conditions, because of the underlying medical disorder. And we can up and down titrate insulin to achieve the desired glucose control. So insulin should be used. IV insulin infusion for critically sick patients, and subcut insulins for those patients who are non-critically sick patients. We have different insulins. We have rapid-acting insulins like insulin Lispro, insulin Aspart, and insulin glulicin. We have short-acting regular insulins. We have intermediate-acting NPH insulins. We have long-acting insulins like insulin determining glargine. We have glargine U300 also, which is ultra-long-acting second-generation basal insulins. We have insulin deglutide also, which is also a second-generation insulin, a long-acting insulin, ultra-long-acting insulin. We should use a glucometer for monitoring of blood sugar, because we might have to monitor for IV infusion 1 hourly or 2 hourly or 4 hourly, for subcut insulins 4 hourly or 6 hourly. But always keep that thing in our mind. Those patients who are in shock, who are on inotropes, having hypoperfusion, these might not give us correct results. So a patient on vasopressors or in shock or in hypotension, the capillary blood sugar will give us very low blood sugar values. So always check with the venous blood sugar. Suppose in a patient of shock on dopamine or vasopressin or other vasopressors, or noradrenaline infusion, capillary blood sugar in one of the patients gave us blood sugar readings of around 40 or 50, and once we check for venous blood sugar, it might be around 400 also. So always check venous blood sugar in those patients and patients of shock. And for IV infusion patients, you might have to monitor 1 hourly or 2 hourly or 4 hourly. But for those patients who are non-critically sick patients, if the patient is taking meals, you are using a regular insulin, we might have to monitor 6 hourly. We know the duration of action of regular insulin is 6 hourly. If we are using analog insulin, regular analog insulins, the duration is 3 to 4 hours, then we have to monitor 4 hourly also. So for critically sick patients, once we admit these patients in ICU, what to use? We have to use IV insulin infusion. What is the protocol? There are different protocols. The simplest protocol is GL protocol. So once a patient comes in emergency room or in ICU, whatever the blood sugar is, the target can be 120 to 160, or you can keep in between 140 to 180 also. Whatever the blood sugar the patient is having, you can divide that blood sugar by 100. So let's take one example. Suppose a patient of 80 kgs comes in our emergency room and the blood sugar is more than 300. So you have to give a bolus dose first. So 80 kg patient, 0.1 unit per kg body weight. That means of 80 kg patient, 0.1 unit means 8 unit. Give bolus 8 unit, and then start infusion. If the blood sugar was 325 divided by 100, you can give 3.25 units up. You can round up to 3.5 unit per hour. Then that means of 80 kg patient weight, give bolus 8 unit and start infusion at 3.5 unit per hour if the blood sugar was around 325. So if the blood sugar is 500, you can divide by 100, you can start infusion at 5 unit per hour, give a bolus of, depending on the weight of the patient. If it's 80 kg, give 8 unit bolus, and the blood sugar is 500, start 5 unit per hour. Then monitor blood sugar 1 hourly or 2 hourly. Depending on the blood sugar, the last blood sugar, you can up or down titrate the insulin dose, and the target blood sugar should be 140 to 180. It's very, very simple. You can give this algorithm to your subordinates, to your colleagues, to the nursing staff, to the medical officers, to the GRs, so they can follow this protocol and target blood sugar in between 140 to 180. So there are different algorithms. You can start with algorithm 1. If the blood sugars are not within the normal range, you can shift on to algorithm 2, 3, or 4. So once we have started IV insulin infusion in a patient who is admitted in medical ICU or emergency room, and the patient has responded to the treatment, patient has now started taking orally, then you can shift on subcut insulins. The half-life of IV insulin is only 5 minutes. Once you stop IV insulin, and then if you start subcut insulins, it will take some time for subcut insulins to act, and there will be rebound hyperglycemia. Before stopping IV insulin infusion, always start subcut insulins before discontinuation of IV insulin infusion. So there should be overlap of subcut insulins before stoppage of IV insulin infusion. If you want to start short-acting insulin, give 1 to 2 hours before discontinuation of IV insulin infusion. If you want to use long-acting glargine, give 2 to 3 hours prior to discontinuation of IV insulin infusion drug, so as to prevent rebound hyperglycemia. When to shift patients from IV insulin to subcut insulins? If the patient is a case of type 1 diabetes, if the patient is a case of type 2 diabetes, and the patient was already on insulins, and patient, if the case is a type 2 diabetes, the patient was requiring high IV insulin infusion, that means 2 units per hour for control of blood sugars. So as to summarize, the management of hyperglycemia in hospitalized patients in critical care setting, that means patients admitted in emergency rooms or in ICU setting. So we have to use IV insulin infusion. Good control, that's conventional control of 140 to 180 is the target. You can lower down to 110. Less than 110 is not acceptable. More than 180 is not recommended. And IV insulin should be used, and we should use a validated protocol, and should have a proper algorithm protocol. It should provide to our colleagues, to our staff in ICU and emergency rooms, so that they can follow that protocol and achieve the desired control of blood sugar. Now coming to the non-critical setting, these are those patients who are admitted in ward or general. They are admitted for some surgery, or they are non-critically sick patients. They might be taking proper meals also. The 3 discrete meals might be breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Admitted for some surgery also, or some medical reasons also, for some infections also. So let's take example of these patients. The common insulin which is being admitted, used for these patients still in 99% of the hospitals all across India is sliding scale short-acting insulin, which we have been practicing for last so many decades. This is not recommended nowadays. We should use a basal bolus insulin therapy. This is sliding scale. So we have a chart. As per the chart, we inject insulin to the patient without taking care of about the meals. Depending on the blood sugar of the patient, we monitor the blood sugar. If we are using analog insulin 4 hourly, if we are using regular insulin, we check blood sugar 6 hourly. Depending on the blood sugar of the patient, we are injecting insulin as per this chart. Now let's take this example. This is a reactive approach. Suppose at the breakfast, we are checking blood sugar. Depending on the blood sugar of the patient, see on the right side of this slide, no insulin will be injected at breakfast, because we are not taking meals into consideration. We are checking only for the blood sugar. So before lunch, sugar will be 252, and depending on the blood sugar, we'll have to inject 4 units. Pre-dinner blood sugars are 108. Because pre-lunch we have injected 4 units of regular insulin. And what will happen at bedtime, the blood sugars will go up because no insulin has been injected before dinner because of the meals what we have taken, what the patient has taken at the time of dinner. The bedtime insulin has gone up, and because of the high blood sugar at that time, the regular insulin will be injected, and what will happen during late night hours, the blood sugar will go down. So what's happening? This is known as glycemic variability. The blood sugars are going up and down and up and down. We are creating a roller coaster pattern. We know glycemic variability is very dangerous for the patient. This is the problem with the sliding scale insulin regime. So if we see only very small period of time, the blood sugar is within the target range. If we see this this in this slide, and creating a roller coaster pattern. And we know the time in range is very important. Time in range, if you see the 24-hour and time in range blood sugars, if you go for the CGMS, very little period of time the blood sugars will be within the target range. Most of the time the blood sugars are going up and down and up and down. We know glycemic variability increases mortality and morbidity for the patients who are admitted in the hospital. So this is not a good regime. But still, this is being used all across multiple hospitals in India. But it has some advantages. It's convenient, simple, can be initiated easily. But this is not evidence-based. It's a reactive approach and not individualized. That means the problem is that same sliding scale insulin regime is being used for all the type of patients, whether the patient is having duration of diabetes of 20 years or the patient is having duration of diabetes of 5 years. Because a patient of duration of diabetes of 20 years will be more insulin deficient in comparison to those patients having duration of diabetes of 5 years. A patient who is obese, having severe abdominal adiposity, in comparison to those patients, a thin and lean patient. Because a thin and lean patient will require less amount of insulin because he will be having less insulin resistance, or a patient of severe abdominal adiposity will require more insulin because of severe insulin resistance. Also, it is not taking care of the calculation for meals. It is only just checking blood sugar and injecting insulin on the basis of only blood sugar readings. So this is a reactive approach. For injecting insulin, whether the patient is admitted in hospital or the patient requires physiological insulin replacement, we should use a basal bolus insulin regime. So in a healthy person, the insulin is released in two ways. One is basal insulin. This is basal insulin is released in a pulsatile manner, which controls fasting blood sugar level. And we know the fasting blood sugar is dependent on hepatic glucose output. To control hepatic glucose output, to control fasting blood sugar level, we require basal insulin. To control prandial blood sugar levels, we require prandial insulin. So the prandial insulin is released in relation to meals. So once we admit a patient in our hospital, we require one is basal insulin to control fasting blood sugar level. If the patient is taking proper meals, we require a mealtime insulin or bolus insulin to control post-meal rise in blood sugar. If the patient is not taking any meals, then because of the illness, underlying disease, we already have shown in previous slide at the start of my presentation that because of underlying disease, might be medical stress, surgical stress, any sort of underlying stress because of the disease, there are release of some of the counter-regulatory hormones, some like catecholamines, cortisol and growth hormone. These hormones cause hyperglycemia. Because of the disease stress, there will be rising blood sugar. In addition to basal insulin, we require extra amount of insulin to control that rising blood sugar because of the underlying disease, because of the underlying stress. That extra amount of insulin which has to be injected, that short-acting insulin, which might have to be injected 6 hourly if we are using regular insulin, or 4 hourly if we are using short-acting analog, rapid-acting analog insulin for rising blood sugar. That extra amount of insulin is known as correctional dose insulin, not booster insulin. If the patient is taking meals, then we have to use extra amount of insulin. That will be also short-acting or rapid-acting analog for meal insulin. So meal and correction dose insulin will be combined together in those patients who are taking proper meals. If the patient is not taking any meals, then we have to use only correctional booster insulin. That will be rapid-acting analog or a short-acting insulin. And basal insulin should be a long-acting insulin, which should work 24 hours to control fasting blood sugar level. That will be because of hepatic glucose output. Just to summarize, basal insulin should be insulin, mainly insulin glargine, which will control fasting blood sugar level. We know that it works for 24 hours, and insulin determinate does not work for 24 hours. It has to be injected twice a day. And NPH also works twice a day, but NPH has a peak. The chances of hypoglycemia are much, much higher with NPH insulin. Nutritional insulin is for meals. We have to use a short-acting insulin like regular insulin or a rapid-acting analog. It has to be injected subcutaneously before meals. And correctional dose insulin, if we are using rapid-acting analog 4 hourly, if we are using regular insulin, so it can be used 6 hourly. If the patient is NPO, if the patient is taking meals, this extra insulin should be given before meals with nutritional insulin. Now let's take an example. How to calculate the total amount of insulin. Suppose a patient was on oral antidiabetic drugs. We want to admit that patient because of some underlying disease and a non-critical illness like pneumonia or UTI. Once we want to admit that patient, depending on the weight of the patient. The patient is ideal body weight like 60 kg with BMI of 23. The total amount of insulin the patient will require is 0.5 unit per kg body weight. 60 kg, that means the patient will require 30 unit of insulin. For obese patients, if we want to calculate the total amount of insulin for 24 hours, the obese patient, we have to calculate extra amount of insulin, that is 0.6 unit per kg body weight. For lean or renal compromise, less amount of insulin, 0.3 to 0.4 unit per kg body weight is required. Let's take this example. 30 per a person for a person of 60 kg body weight, we will require, for a 60 kg body weight with BMI of 23, 30 units will be required. 15 units will be basal, that is glargine, that will control fasting blood sugar level. 15 will be bolus, that is if the patient is taking proper meals, discrete 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, 5 units before breakfast, 5 units before lunch, 5 units before dinner. Additional correctional doses will be, bolus will be given because of underlying disease. Before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner, blood sugar should be checked. And the target blood sugar before meal should be 100. But because of the underlying disease, the blood sugar will be high. So how to calculate the correctional factor? There's a formula that is 1500 divided by total daily dose. Then every 50 milligram rise in blood sugar before meals, we have to inject 1 unit of insulin. So if before breakfast, the blood sugar is 250. Our target was 100. 250 minus 100 is rise in blood sugar by 150 divided by correctional factor. That means 3 units have to be injected extra, that is correctional bolus, in addition to 5 units for meals. That is for a patient of 60 kg body weight with 23 BMI, normal body weight. Total daily dose is 30 units. The 15 unit will be basal, that is glargine, which has to be given bedtime. 15 will be bolus, that is short-acting regular insulin, 5 units before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner. The patient is taking proper meals. But before meals, we have to check blood sugar. If the blood sugar is high, it might be 250. The target was 100. So rising blood sugar is by 150. For every 15 milligram rise, we have to inject 1 extra unit. So we have to add 3 units to the meal insulin. So 8 units has to be injected before meals. For CKD patients, the target should be very flexible. In a patient of dialysis, the HbA1c target should be 7.5 to 8. The fasting blood sugar 100 to 140 and 2 hour post meal less than 200. There are some studies, just can have a gross look. Diabetes 2 trial for medicine patients, it has shown basal bolus is much better regime for these patients. Once these patients are admitted in hospital, right from admission day to the 10th or 4th day, you can see better blood sugar control. The mean blood sugar are much better with basal bolus insulin than sliding scale. So basal bolus is much better insulin regime than sliding scale. And those patients who were on sliding scale and their blood sugar, around 14% of patients on sliding scale, were on sliding scale, and after 4th day of therapy, in their sliding scale, the insulin were increased. Their blood sugar was still more than 240. They were shifted on basal bolus and see the drop in blood sugar and good control of blood sugar. So Rabbit 2 trial for medical patients, those patients were admitted in medical wards, it has shown that basal bolus insulin has a more efficacy, good glycemic control in those patients who are admitted in medical wards. And you can see the hypoglycemia rate, the moderate or the severe hypoglycemia was similar in these two groups. So blood sugar less than 60 and less than 40, it was similar in sliding scale insulin regime and basal bolus insulin. So there was no increase in hypoglycemia in basal bolus insulin and sliding scale insulin regime. But at the same time, blood sugar was much better under control from the day of admission to the 10th day of admission. If we compare sliding scale and basal bolus, those patients who were on sliding scale, and 14% of patients whose blood sugar was more than 240, even on increasing the dose of sliding scale, were shifted on basal bolus, and they had much better glycemic control with basal bolus. Then there are another class of patients who were admitted for surgery, and what we wanted post-surgery, what we saw that the post-operative complications were less in that group who were started on basal bolus insulin regime. The post-operative complication, the most important was wound infection. The wound infection was less in those class of patients who were started on basal bolus in comparison to those on sliding scale, and other complications also like pneumonia, bacteremia, acute renal failure, respiratory failure were less. But these complications did not achieve statistical significance except wound infection, which was very much significant in those patients who received basal bolus in comparison to sliding scale. Glycemic efficacy, I told you, was better with basal bolus in comparison to sliding scale. You can see here wound infection much less with insulin glargine and insulin glucose. That this is basal, this is bolus in comparison to sliding scale. This is very important, and composite of all the complications was less with the basal bolus than sliding scale. So this is very important. So in those patients who are admitted for surgery, we should use a basal bolus insulin regime, and it can show the composite of post-operative complications are less than with the basal bolus in comparison to sliding scale. but severe hypoglycemia was more in basal bolus in comparison to sliding scale. The reason for that might have been because in surgical patients, some of the patients might be on NPO, that means taking nothing perorally, or the food was withheld in some of the patients because they had to go for surgery. That might be one of the reasons that in comparison to rabbit to medical patient trial, rabbit to surgery patient trial, that the severe hypoglycemia was much higher in basal bolus insulin regime in comparison to sliding scale insulin regime. About the premix insulins, it should not be used for IBD patients because there was 3 times increase in chances of hypoglycemia in premix insulins like premix 3070. And these should never be used in those patients who are admitted in hospital for either non-critical settings or critical settings. So current evidence supports the basal bolus regime as more effective, easier to design and adjust, better for blood glucose control and low risk of hypoglycemia than alternate strategies. So whether a patient is admitted in ICU and started with IV insulin infusion as per the protocol, as per the algorithms what we have discussed, and patient has responded to the treatment, shifted on subcut insulins, and the patient has been shifted from ICU to the wards and started on subcut basal bolus insulin regime, and patient has responded to the treatment. Now we are planning for discharge. Or the patient has been admitted with some non-critical illness and patient has been started on basal bolus insulin regime, but I have discussed the protocol and the patient has responded to the treatment. We are planning for discharge. What should be the discharge insulin algorithm? So it depends on the baseline HbA1c which was done at the time of admission. If the baseline HbA1c was less than 7%, if there are no contraindication to the anti-diabetic treatment, we can continue with the same treatment that the patient was taking at the time of admission. If the HbA1c is 7 to 9%, then we can continue with the anti-diabetic treatment if there are no contraindications to the oral anti-diabetic drugs. And we can continue with the 50% of glargine dose what the patient was receiving in the hospital. And if the HbA1c is more than 9%, we should continue with the basal bolus insulin regime, but the patient was receiving in the hospital. But some of the patients might not be ready for 4-time insulin shots. So then the other option is continue with the oral anti-diabetic drugs and use 80% of the insulin glargine dose what the patient was receiving in the hospital. Now to conclude my today's presentation, we know hyperglycemia is common in hospitalized patients. It's very, very common. All hospitalized patients should have strict blood glucose control, but not intensive blood glucose control. We know the most rapid acting, powerful and safe agent to control blood glucose is insulin. IV insulin infusion is preferred for critically sick patients, and basal bolus insulin regime is a preferred alternative, better alternative to sliding scale insulin regime. And if we use good algorithms, proper algorithms, and of insulin treatment in hospital patients, we can decrease mortality. We can decrease inpatient complications, mainly in post-surgical patients also. We can decrease the length of stay in hospital. We can decrease overall hospital costs also. And in patients who are admitted for post-CABG also, post-MI complications and other surgical complications, we can decrease all these complications also. Thank you for your kind attention. Over to you to the main headquarters and the Sermon Center.
There are a few questions in the chat box. Please visit chat box.
There are some questions, so let me have a look at the chat box. First question is from Kanchan Thakur. Doctor, in emergency, if 100 IU syringe is not available, then what is the immediate intervention? Yeah, this is a very, very important question. So what we can do if we have U40 IU syringe available, then what we have to do, and we have 100 IU vial, and so that means we have 100 IU vial and we have U40 syringe. So we have to reduce the dose by 2.5 times. That means if we have U100 vial and if we take, we have to take 40 units. Suppose we use U40 syringe if we take 1 ml, we feel that we have taken 40 units, but that will not be 40 units, that will be 100 units because we are using U40 syringe. U40 syringe, once we take 1 ml, it will show that's 40 units, but it will not be 40 units because we are using U100 vial. So it will be 100 units. So we have to reduce the dose. Once we take the insulin, if we are using U40 syringe, reduce the dose by 2.5 times in that U40 syringe. Another question is, what is the role of bleeding during pricking of insulin? Once you are using subcut insulin, sometimes you might prick a subcut vein. There are some subcutaneous tissue you have injected. The best place to prick insulin is subcut fat on abdomen. So sometimes there are multiple veins also. Sometimes you can prick a vein also. So no problems. If you prick a vein, there might be some mild spotting of blood from that side. You can just place an ice pack on that side. No issues, no problems with that. And should we discard a unit or re-administer the same? It's better to discard, and there might be loss of some insulins also. That means if you prick a vein, there might be some bleeding from the side. You have already injected insulin, no issues with that. But if you have injecting insulin subcutaneously, some drop of blood is coming out, you can wipe that blood and can apply ice only. You should not inject insulin again because you never know, it can cause hypoglycemia. Then another question is there, doctor, what is the best way to educate nursing staff for administering insulin, as they mostly get confused between syringe of 40 IU and the best way is use U40 syringe with 40 IU vial. Always read the label on vial also and see the syringe also. On 40 IU syringe, there will be labeling up to 40 IU only. And if you are using 100 IU vial, use U100 IU syringe only. The marking will be in black, and the marking will be up to 100 IU. So use U100 IU syringe with the U100 vial. Please read the label on the vial. It will be written there on U100 per ml. On 40 IU vial, it will be written U40 per ml. And use U40 syringe. The marking will be up to 40 on U40 syringe. The marking will be up to U100 on 100 IU syringe. And the markings will be black on syringe of U100. The markings will be red on U40 syringe. Another question is, doctor, in your clinical practice, have you ever come across hypoglycemic events in patients on glargine despite preclass? Yeah. Glargine U100, even though most of the time it has least chances of hypoglycemia, it is almost peakless, but it has some peak. So it can cause U100 glargine, still can cause some nocturnal hypoglycemia. And there are some cases what we come across in our day-to-day clinical practice who develop nocturnal hypoglycemia or early morning hypoglycemia with glargine. So that was the reason there has been the development of U-glargine 300 and the outcome of the second generation basal insulin, that means U-glargine 300 and insulin degludec. Insulin degludec and glargine U300 has less peak. Almost these are peakless insulins. Even though glargine U100 is also peakless, the least chances of hypoglycemia is U-glargine 300. But we come across some of the cases which they report us with nocturnal hypoglycemias. And but then we shift these patients on second generation basal insulin like U-glargine 300 or on insulin degludec also, and this issue is being taken care of. So any more questions in the chat box? I can't see.
Currently, sir, there are no any other questions, but can we wait for a couple of minutes if attendees have any query or any questions so they can ask?
Repeat your Query?
Yeah, sir, we can wait couple of minutes.
And there was how to education is more important. I want to just add some important facts about insulin use. Once we are counseling patients for insulin use, or once we are training our nursing staff or our junior doctors for insulin use, we have multiple modalities of insulin use. One is use with our syringes. I already discussed about U40 syringes and U100 syringes. We have U40 vials and U100 vials. Now, with time, you see across Western countries, more often they are using, to avoid this confusion, they are nowadays using only U100 vials and U100 syringes only. But still in India, we are still using U40 vials and U40 syringes. And we have insulin pens and the insulin cartridges. In insulin pens, we are using only U100 cartridges. So U100 cartridges means per ml has 100 units of insulin. And now we have other insulin pens also with the U200 cartridges. That means 1 ml has 200 units of cartridge. And I have already discussed about U300 glargine. That means 1 ml has 300 of units of insulin glargine. It is more concentrated. About the glargine comes in acidic pH. So once this is injected subcutaneously in neutral pH, it can cause some pain. So some of the patients might come to us that once we are injecting insulin glargine subcutaneously, they might complain of some amount of pain. But with time, they can adapt to that type sort of pain. So sometimes some of the patients can complain of some amount of pain. And with pens, once we are using pens. And with pens, we are using 31 gauge needles and 4 mm needles, which are virtually painless. But with needles, we are using 28 gauge needles and 6 to 8 mm length needles. So needles within might cause some amount of pain, but pen needles are virtually painless. At the same time, rotation of site is very important. Sometimes we might be injecting insulin at the same site multiple times. It causes lipohypertrophy and some amount of fibrosis. So it causes glycemic variability. On the same day, we might be injecting insulin, same dose, and that next day the fasting blood sugar might be within the normal range. And another day, we might be injecting insulin at this lipohypertrophy site, which might not be acting properly, and the blood sugars might be high. And so patient will have glycemic variability, and this is also one of the reasons of causing hypoglycemia in patients with the glargine U100. So suppose on one day, patient is injecting insulin in lipohypertrophy site. Patient will next day checking blood sugar for fasting. Checking fasting blood sugar, it might be high side, so the patient will increase the dose, and 3-4 days down the line, the patient might be injecting insulin at normal subcut site, and while increasing the dose, it can cause hypoglycemia. This is also one of the causes of hypoglycemia, what we see with insulins with glargine also. It might not be because of increased peak with glargine, it might be because of wrong administration of insulin also. There's one question. Do you agree nursing education plays a vital role in hospitalized patients? Very, very important. Let's take for examples. We know if we are using regular insulins, we know the onset of action for subcut regular insulins it takes 30 to 45 minutes once we are injecting subcutaneously if we talk about regular insulins. But what we do, if we do not educate nursing staff properly, what they do in general wards, once they inject regular insulins and they tell the patient to take meals. So what happens? The post-meal blood sugars in most of the patients, they go up, because we know it has delayed onset of action. If we talk about regular insulin, slow absorption from the subcut site, and immediately post-meal sugars will be up, and late next pre-meal hypoglycemia will be there. So this is an issue with regular insulins. So in hospitalized patients, it is better to use rapid-acting insulin analogs like Lispro, Aspart, glycine. Nowadays we have fast-acting Aspart also, that comes with the name of Fiasp, which can be injected immediately after meal also. So this is a very serious issue, using regular insulin and injecting just before meals, because the patients are not waiting for half an hour or 45 minutes before meals, or not waiting for the meals once they have been injected with regular insulins, and nurses are not educated that they have to tell the patient to wait for 30 to 45 minutes. They inject regular insulin and tell the patient to take meals. This causes immediately post-meal hyperglycemia and next meal pre-meal hypoglycemia also. So nurses' education is very, very important. How to titrate the doses, how to monitor the blood sugar, how to rotate the site of insulin injection, and this is very important. Another question is there. Okay, this is just a feedback from Dr. Dhruv Khurana. So it was very much informative as I was using sliding scale regime, but novel transform. Thank you, Dr. Dhruv, for this feedback from your side. It's very easy, because you see, once we are using sliding scale, the sugars will be fluctuating up and down, and that is the reason for glycemic variability, and that causes, and you will be getting so many calls from the nursing staff or from their junior doctors also. They might be driving the car, you might be attending some sort of function, might be a marriage function or some sort of party. So once you get the call that blood sugar is 250 or 300, you might not be knowing what the previous blood sugar was, what type of regime the patient is receiving. So, you never know what type of meal the patient is going to receive. Whether the patient is NPO or patient has vomited out, or patient might not be taking proper meals. So it depends on your mental status, how much amount of insulin you're going to tell to the concerned nursing staff or the medical officer on duty, how much insulin has to be injected to the patient. So it goes haywire. So once you tell the nursing staff or the doctor, inject this much amount of insulin without having the proper. So we have to make a proper algorithm. So it is for all the hospitals, whether you have a small nursing home, or you have a private clinic, or you are working in a corporate hospital, or you are working in a government setup. You should have a proper algorithm, proper protocol for intensive care unit, for cardiac care unit, for emergency rooms, for general wards, whether surgical or medical wards, and everybody has to follow that algorithm, and that should be a uniform algorithm to follow. Then we can decrease morbidity and mortality in these type of patients. So I feel there are no more questions in the chat box. Should we conclude for today if it is over?
Okay, sir, I guess there are no any other questions. So can we conclude the session with your permission?
Yes, you can conclude now. I think.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of organizer, thank you for your insightful and educative talk, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you all the attendees for patient listening. I'm ending the session now. Thank you.
Thank you to the audience.
Thank you, sir.